Welcome to Sputnik with me, Hafsa Kara Mustafa, standing in for a few more weeks for George Galloway.
And still me, Gayatri.
Islam, being flavour of the decade it seems, continues to generate much interest from the media and wider society. After each terror attacks, journalists and political figures feel they need to say or do something and attempt to explain the situation.
Sir Trevor Phillips, former chair of Equality and Human Rights Commission, has been asked to analyze a large-scale survey commissioned by Channel 4 that provides, we are told, great insight into the Muslim mindset.
To discuss ICM's survey on what Muslims are thinking is media spokesman for the Muslims Public Affairs Committee, MPAC, Raza Nadim. Raza, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me on.
Raza, I'm just curious, what is your overall sentiment of it? Because obviously prior to the publishing of the survey, there was a lot of talk about it. And then eventually when the show aired on Thursday, what did you feel when you watched it?
To be honest, it was more of the same of what we've seen in the past, especially from Trevor Phillips, kind of the talk of multiculturalism has failed, etc. What I found very worrying, I mean, we can talk about, how the data was analysed, etc. People have done that already. For me, it was like he'd taken all his main phrases and topics from the handbook of David Cameron, British Values. And he was talking about orthodox British society. What is that? He was talking about we need to be much more muscular with our values. And that was exactly what David Cameron said. I remember last year he actually said, for far too long we've been tolerant of people just because they obey the law. We need to do more than that. I mean, something like a villain would say in a comic book. And Trevor Phillips was echoing those exact same sentiments. And for me and for a lot of Muslims, for them it felt like this is just a PR exercise for the government to legitimise the surveillance bill, the snoopers charter and the counter-extremism strategy which so many people are against. And for me, I think it was just about trying to swing public opinion more so and say, look out for these Muslims, they're here to take over, they're barbaric, they're uncivilised, they're the other.
One thing that strikes me really every time there's a similar survey that appears is the focusing on homosexuality. Islam and homosexuality. And the reality is, I mean, up until a few years ago, I remember in the tabloids, they would out gay celebrities and a lot of comedy materials about limperis and gay innuendos. So it just appears as if only Muslims are homophobic.
Yeah.
But what if another survey was conducted in an all-white sort of Cotswold environment?
Well, exactly. But see, it's more than that for me, Hafsa, is that it's the views that Islam has on homosexuality are extremely similar, if not the same, as Christianity and Judaism. But Islam is singled out. And so for me, and for many Muslims, they say, you're actually not genuine on the topic. You don't actually care about the topic. And if you're so morally outraged, why don't we hold Nicky Morgan to account, who, when she was the secretary for, I think, for gay rights, she actually voted against or abstained from voting for gay marriage. So hang on, so where's your outrage then? I think that's what many Muslims say, that actually you don't care about the issue. For you, it's just a stick to beat Muslims with, and we're not going to tolerate that. And to be honest, Muslims' position, if you were to talk to the average Muslim about homosexuality, their position's fairly clear, which is Islam doesn't condone it, but at the same time, you don't go around kicking someone's heads in about, if they're gay. That's a very simple thing, and something that Jews and Christians believe, and most monotheistic religions believe anyway. So I think for most Muslims, it's this spotlight about homosexuality and any other issue, it's just a stick to beat us with, and it's to further a narrative that says, oh, they'll never be as civilized and as liberal as us. And I think that was very interesting. I saw a tweet about the topic. Someone said, according to the survey, which is very skewed, it said 52% of people apparently were, wanted homosexuality to be, to be made illegal. But actually, that was the same percentage of Tory MPs that were against it, voting for gay marriage, etc. So it's where it's where this is selective outrage. On some issues, oh God, we're the champions of liberalism and values, etc. But when it comes to only when it comes to Muslims, and that's for many Muslims just doesn't sit right, saying that it's just an excuse to beat us.
And that is exactly on the other side of the coin. That's exactly what outrages the Muslims, that they're being biased and selected upon that.
But also, do you know what is Gayatri? That it's always talking about us as a immigrant community. You talk to, you know, my younger sister or someone, you know, whose child was born here, they're not an immigrant anymore. At which point do you stop referring to them as, oh, they come from an immigrant background? Don't half of the people in this country come from an immigrant background? Not everyone was born in England, you know, they'll have some roots somewhere.
In London itself, the majority are from a minority background.
Yeah, but see, that's the thing, it's always, and part of it is, it's a racist undertone, which says that these people are the other, the fifth column, or as Trevor Phillips said, a nation within a nation. And that phrase, it's shocking because this same kind of language and the racist undertones we've seen from other people. And to be honest, some racists, they loved Trevor Phillips' documentary because they can say, look, we're not, because look, he said, yeah, exactly. Trevor Phillips said it, and he was a former race and equalities minister, so we can't be bad. And the thing is, well, actually, no, Trevor Phillips has a very poor track record on this whole thing. I remember a couple of years ago, he made a documentary about stereotypes and about, you know, different, what we're not allowed to say about race, and, you know, he said many of the stereotypes are true. The whole thing is cringeworthy, and watching it yesterday, A, it was so long, B, it was really boring, but C, it was the same peddling of the Islamophobic narrative that, sadly, we've gotten used to in society.
But as you said, it is in echoing David Cameron's...
yeah, the British values stuff.
Values. Do you think it's succeeding, though?
Yes, and the reason is because anytime we've seen a, you know, like a terrible terrorist attack that's taken place, so let's take Paris, Brussels, etc. What happens is often you see our government essentially using that as an excuse to push through legislation. But let's forget the terrorist attacks. Then you've got media spokespeople, you've got pundits, you've got political commentators, you've got think tanks, you've got MPs themselves who will say, oh, Islam's a bit iffy, Islam doesn't fit in with us, oh, they're out to get us, they're extremists, look at all these immigrants coming to the country, the refugees, look, they're all, you know, economic migrants. All this language, what it does is it makes the average Joe, who doesn't know any better, will say, maybe this is the biggest problem we face. You know, forget Panama, forget the Panama Papers.
Exactly.
Let's forget the fact that we've got bankers that have, you know, that have decimated this country's economy.
Dodgers.
Yeah, let's not talk about any of that stuff. Instead, let's focus on this 5% of the population who apparently are the cause of all the world's problems. I'm surprised they haven't started blaming us for global warming yet.
The French Prime Minister has re-triggered the debate on the headscarf.
Yes.
And one Muslim activist famously said, well, I'll tell you what, let's rename unemployment Islam, and hopefully he'll be able to tackle it in that sense. But do you think it is truly a diversion from the realities and the problems that the politicians are completely ignoring?
Oh, undoubtedly. I mean, it's, you know, if you... I remember there was a survey that actually asked people how many Muslims do you think there are in Europe or in the UK, and the numbers were inflated amongst most white British people of Christian background because they're constantly told these people are the fifth column looking to take over, and it really does skew the conversation. And, you know, we should be having an adult conversation about multiculturalism, about dealing with the refugee crisis, about the Panama Papers, about the illegal wars that our government has waged, but none of that. What they want to talk about is, what's that single Muslim mother in Bradford, what's she doing, because she's part of this plan. And I think the other part of it that really annoys me like the Muslims is that it's always referring to us as a monolithic community, as if we're all on one big WhatsApp group planning things. And it's really annoying that, hang on, what someone does somewhere else in the country is not on me. And it's very frustrating because Anders Breivik, a white terrorist from a Christian background in Europe, he is treated as an individual. But if one individual commits any crime in the UK who's of a Muslim background, somehow that's something to do with your religion. And it's very frustrating because all it does is it leads to more intolerance, and we're seeing it spill over into more violence. So, I mean, this documentary wasn't that great, but all it did was, it was just another nail in that coffin that says, yeah, Muslims are bad, yeah, they're against us. And it all starts to snowball.
And ironically, it comes from Channel 4, the exact channel where its news anchor, Kathy Newman, was faking that whole coming out of the
She was ushered out, yes, I remember, yeah. And it's Channel 4 have had a couple of these pieces in the past, I mean, you know, and Trevor Phillips as well. So it's actually not that surprising what I've seen. I mean, Channel 4 had produced that Jihadis Next Door documentary too. And all it does is the perfect backdrop for the government, because people are less likely to be outraged and fight back about their rights being taken if you tell them that, hang on, these people are looking to take over. And in that sense, as bad as it was, it did a great job for the government because it legitimizes their policies.
Yeah, but the reason why I asked you whether it succeeds or not among the public is when it first came out, I heard it once on the radio and not much else since. So I wonder whether the public is sensing, wait a minute, this is becoming childish, this is becoming a bit too...
The thing is, for some people it did. I think, you know, like, oh, come on, what do you mean what British Muslims really think? What are you trying to get at? But also at the same time, society has become quite polarised, I find. That some people are very set in their views about Muslims, that that's it, you're bad, you're all evil, and that's that. Nothing that you say or do will change my opinion on that. You're all terrorist sympathisers, etc. And I think, to be honest, there's two problems. One is, as a Muslim community, we're not doing enough to tackle this stuff. And actually, you know, when this documentary comes out, it's a standard response from the Muslims. You'll get some Muslims on social media who will call it out, which is really good, and we need more of that. But if you look at the Muslim institutions, they're very apathetic in addressing these problems. And young Muslims who are looking to take some organised action to tackle racism, to tackle Islamophobia, to tackle even local issues of drug, crime, whatever, unemployment, they can't go to the institutions to address them. So that's one part of the problem. But the second part of the problem is that Muslims are facing an industry, an Islamophobia industry, that is working flat out from everything from documentaries, articles, whatever it is, to say Muslims are a threat to our way of life. And what's happening is that language is becoming more mainstream. And that is what's very worrying, that we are always seen as the problem. Everything is our fault. And it does spill over into a lot more violence. Look after Paris, look after Brussels. You know, things are getting worse, and our government and Muslim institutions aren't helping the problem.
Just briefly, what do you expect as a consequence of the survey coming out, for one thing? And also, what would you expect from the younger Muslims to do in reaction to all this rising Islamophobia?
Yeah, well, from this particular survey, it'll be interesting because reality, the story's kind of died a death, but I mean, it will raise more questions about how these surveys are conducted, because people were quite angry that they only focused on 20%, you know, areas where Muslims made up 20% or more of the population in the constituency in the UK, which is quite limited because most Muslims are quite spread out across the country. So it isn't very good in that sense. I mean, there will be questions asked about that. There will be follow-on discussions, you know, talks, etc. But from the Muslim community's perspective and young Muslims, I think for them, what's really annoying is always being spoken about the other. You know, you talk to, you know, a young 20-year-old kid here. For him, he's British. This is his country. He's not going anywhere else. He lives here. You know, he's a Londoner. You know, wherever he lives, this is his life. But he's always being told, no, you're different. And this is the other thing that's very important to remember. Many of the younger Muslim generation, their entire lives, they've lived the war on terror period. That's all they've ever seen. I mean, I was a young kid when 9/11 happened, so I've had a life before 9/11. You know, but the propaganda against Muslims really hyped up. So most of these kids, all they've ever been told is, you're evil, you don't belong here, your religion is bad, and that has a real psychological impact. And then to top it all off, they're told, you need to do more to integrate. That's like the final slap, is to say, you don't belong, but you need to do more to integrate. And young Muslims, that just doesn't fly with them, and they're angry, and they are venting, you know, you see it on social media. But really, the government, if it says we're all in it together, they need to prove it. And right now, their words and their actions say otherwise.
As you can see, this subject is huge, so we're going to have to talk a bit more about it. Join us after the break. Welcome back on board the Sputnik. Still with me, Raza Nadim. Thank you very much for staying. Raza, you mentioned the youth, you know, young British Muslims who actually grew up in the context of the war on terror. Now, marginalisation, feeling excluded, coming from poor backgrounds, isn't all this an environment and atmosphere of Islamophobia actually conducive to radicalization?
Well, a couple of things on this point. You're right that it's, you know, you've got this whole generation, their entire lives, that's all they've heard, you know, 14, 15-year-olds, all they've been told Islam is evil. And it does have an impact. You know, they just, you know, they feel they don't belong to this country. And if you talk to some of the, you know, some of the interviews that have been conducted with people that have joined ISIS, they've actually said part of the reason is that they've gone from here is because they're saying, well, I'm not wanted here, and they want me there. You know, they respect me. I'll be a king there. You know, they've been sold a false image of what ISIS is. You know, and they've bought into that. So it definitely plays a role. But also with radicalisation. See, the thing is, within the UK, the conversation that the government has been leading on about radicalisation is so flawed because it assumes that there's a simple linear process, as if everyone just follows the same path and becomes radical. And this is very important because it leads to all these massive repercussions. So the government's understanding of radicalization extremism is Islam is the main factor. You know, you wake up one day, read the Quran in the wrong way, you're going to start killing people. And so what they've done is the prevent strategy and other strategies that the government has put in place to deal with extremism. What they've done is that they've said, what is it about your religion that turns you extreme? So we've seen cases where, you know, I remember there was a local council in the UK that actually said, if your child starts to study too much, that might be a sign of radicalization. If they're not studying enough, that's a sign of radicalization. If their trousers are too high, sign of radicalization. If they've got, you know, facial hair, I thought, if they've got facial hair, that's a sign of radicalization. I thought, look at all those little teenagers when puberty hits them. You're telling me they're not going to have, you know, short trousers and facial hair? It happens. It's a part of life, and you're talking about teenagers being teenagers. And this is the repercussion, though. So what happens is they say, what is it about Islam that turns people radical? And so they start targeting young Muslims, and it leads to more isolation, more alienation, because it makes them say, I can't even be Muslim in this country. And what it does, it confirms in their mind that I'll never be accepted, I'll never be an equal here, and they don't want me here. And what happens, it leads to a break of that contract between the citizen and the state that says, this is my country, this is my nation. And when that contract is broken in a person's mind, they don't have any, you know, sympathy or it means nothing to them, that relationship. Well, then that paves the way for others to say, well, we need to destroy these people that are against you, that are against Islam. And so it's, for me, I've always said it, David Cameron and Theresa May are the best recruiting sergeants that ISIS could ask for, because they do their job for them. Every word that comes out of their mouth about radicalization, extremism, just confirms what people like ISIS are saying, which is that they hate you for everything you are, that you Muslims will never be accepted.
But there's a lack of common sense in a way, because obviously the Muslim community in Britain is, well, at the very least, at least 60 years old. So for the best part of 50 years at least, we didn't see any radicals coming out of it. So is the government actually asking questions, thinking, well, hang on, how come this phenomenon is actually quite recent? And especially if you look at the sort of recent attacks across Europe,
yes,
they've all been committed by homegrown terrorists, i.e. Muslims born and bred in France, in Belgium, in Britain.
There's a problem, though, to your line of questioning. That is that you're using common sense, and the government doesn't have that. Because when it comes to this stuff, you're asking for what are the actual root causes of this problem. That's a very adult conversation, and the government's not having that. Because if you were to have an adult conversation, what you start to realise is, well, actually, the wars that we've waged in the Muslim world, propping up of dictators, that's had consequences. You know, you had Obama saying that, you know, ISIS are a direct outgrowth of Al-Qaeda in Iraq. That's because of our war.
That's why you should usually aim before you shoot.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and if possible, talk. You know, and so that, you know, these factors are never discussed. And this is the other really annoying thing, Hafsa, is that whenever any Muslim spokesman or Muslim group or individual says, well, can we talk about all the wars you've waged that have led to people? You know, so for example, the guy in Woolwich who murdered Lee Rigby, what did he say? He said it's to do payback for what you've done to our people in our lands. He's talking about foreign policy, and ethical foreign policy.
And he's even a convert.
Yeah, but what's interesting, though, is the government said, how dare you, people are legit, you know, they're making excuses for terrorism. I'm saying, no, we're not. I'm just saying, the guy who's literally been caught red-handed is saying, this is the reason. Can we talk about that reason? And what happens is say, oh, you're a terrorist sympathizer, you're a non-violent extremist. And what happens is every young Muslim that sees that, they say, oh, here we go again. It's that same propaganda, and they say this government just isn't interested. I just cannot stress enough, because I'm talking to them all the time on social media with the work we do in the community, and they just say that, you know, Raza, you want me, you know, how I don't even feel part of this country. And that's not their fault. That's the government. Those that people in power who are supposed to have some responsibility with their words, they don't take any responsibility, and they push these young Muslims away.
So kids go to school, obviously. They're victim. Many of them have been victim of the prevent strategy.
Oh God, yeah.
How do you see the school evolving now? Are Muslim schools a good idea? Is it the right place to actually educate them on the very basic tenets of Islam and how to be, well, law-abiding citizens, or is the solution elsewhere?
Well, the thing is, for me, when it comes to, you know, religious schools, etc., again, that's a polarizing debate. You know, some people think we should have none at all. For me, the view is that if people want to have that space to you know, within their community, if they want to, you know, teach people within a Muslim environment or Jewish environment or Christian, whatever, that's up to them. should have that freedom. But I think what I don't like is, again, that focus only on Muslim-only schools. And that is, again, what gets a lot of Muslims angry, saying that, hang on, well, you've got other schools. So recently we had a story about a school in North London where the faces of women were scratched off the textbooks because they were very ultra-Orthodox Jews. And, they weren't even talking in English, or their lessons were, weren't in English, etc. That's very pernicious. It needs investigating. But the government only ever wants to talk about Trojan horse scandal in Birmingham, which some MPs found was actually not such a case itself. And so for many Muslims, what really annoys them is that these are genuine issues. Let's talk about, the role of women in society. Let's talk about this. Let's talk about all these issues. Let's talk about schools. But the government, you don't care about these issues because time and time again you have shown that you're not consistent on your outrage on these topics. But secondly, all you do is that you link everything back to extremism. And it's very frustrating for young Muslims saying that not everything is linked to extremism. It's and if you talk to academics, I've been talking to people like Professor David Miller from the University of Bath, Dr. Rizwan Sabir, who's based at Liverpool John Moores. These are great academics who have time and time again shown that there is no proof that actually religion is the factor. It may be a secondary factor, that's cool, but the main factor is that marginalisation, the unethical foreign policy, but the government just doesn't want to discuss it. And even now, they've got this new community forum where they've pumped £5 million into it, and all the people they've got on there are just yes men. And they'll say, yeah, you're right, it's all us, mate, can I have some more money? And so what happens is young Muslims say, half this organisations they don't recognise because they've never ever worked in the community, but also it's like, you're not being genuine either, you just want the funds. And it's the whole thing, it's leading to, and you can see it.
It pays to bash Muslims.
Oh, it does, it's great money. Yeah.
Trevor Phillips discovered that a while ago.
Yeah.
He discussed it as well, by the way, schools, in his documentary, and obviously he was against the religious schools. I just want to turn to the social media because there was great response to that documentary, actually, of people using the hashtag what British Muslims really think. And Luke Holland says, well, I agree with Trevor Phillips. It is time for our schools to integrate. And let's start with Eton and Harrow.
Oh, very good.
And to stick to that point, Dennis Fernando says, so here we go about Muslims not integrating. I have had more Muslims in my life than I have had Etonians.
Yeah, but
talking about segregation.
Exactly,
yeah?
But again, that Etonian argument, because what they do is they talk about there's these selective environments where it's just a small group, and within a community, nation within a nation. What about Eton? Can we talk about the Bullingdon lot as well? What they get up to. But and that's the thing for Muslims, that is...
And the consequences of their policies.
Exactly, and helping their mates move up the ladder, that nepotism that exists there. But it's for many Muslims, especially young Muslims, they're seeing it. Social media has been a game changer. It's allowed you access to information that you wouldn't have before. Before it was, if you didn't see it on mainstream media, you didn't know about it.
But actually, on the point of social media, isn't it sort of channeling all our energies within a sort of safe space? We're in the living room, typing away, and actually not being active enough, not actually writing letters, not perhaps protesting sufficiently,
yes.
Because there is genuine frustration in all communities, not just Muslim communities,
yeah,
actually,
no, you're right.
all the other ones who are viewing all this nepotism and are seeing that there's nothing that is being done. So is social media, in this context, actually a bit of a problem?
It's true, you say that, because it is a bit of a blessing and a bit of a curse. It's a blessing in the sense that the access to information is unprecedented in human history, knowing what's happening right around the world. So, what happened to the Rohingya Muslims a couple of years ago, everyone knew about it. When it happened, Israel was bombing Palestine, mainstream media didn't cover it, but Facebook and Twitter did, and you saw it, and you couldn't run away from it.
But what's happened since?
But see, that's the thing. So that's the blessing element. The curse element of it seems to be that it's the sum total of activism, in some people's cases, a like or a tweet or get a hashtag trending. Now, that has its role, don't get me wrong, and it's vital, actually, because it helps you to take on, state propaganda.
And get the pulse.
Exactly, and get the pulse. But at the same time, it needs to be both, which is the on-the-ground stuff. Nothing really beats a face-to-face conversation, organising on the ground, holding people to account. So look at with David Cameron about the Panama Papers. It's, in Iceland, people are still out on the streets protesting about what happened there.
Yes, and their Prime Minister had the decency to resign.
Yeah, exactly. See, that's the thing, but it's...
But 10% of the population went out, whereas 0.2% of the British population went to the streets.
And it is a very British thing, which is sometimes we do kind of complain from our sitting rooms and living rooms.
Well, look at France. Look how, when they protest, they properly protest.
Yeah.
And I think Britain has only seen this proper mass demo obviously in the run-up of the Iraq War,
Yes,
when
yeah.
2 million people marched. But then, is it
There
a
is-
follow-up?
but you know,
But also the disappointment, because obviously Tony Blair and Bush went into Iraq, and so maybe the people think.
But see, there is a change coming in the sense that social media does lead to more people being made aware and has led to more people joining organisations, joining protests, marches, etc. So we are seeing change. It is a bit too slow for my liking, but there are groups like MPAC and others that are working on this issue, saying that, look, guys, let's turn this anger that we have and this awareness that we have into something greater, actual on-the-ground work, because that is so powerful. And we are seeing it happen. And so I'm hopeful of where it's taking us. And yeah, it's true. It's been a game changer. The government can't come back from that now.
Thank you very much, Raza. You've been a great guest. That's all we've got time for this week aboard the Sputnik with me, Hafsa Kara Mustafa, standing in for George Galloway.
Don't forget to stay in touch with us on Twitter at @RT_Sputnik or on Facebook at Sputnik on Russia Today. Until next week, it's been marvelous.